Welcome to Hobby Herps, Episode 4. Lighting Standards in the Reptile Hobby. Now, this is something that has been gaining a lot of traction lately as far as what needs to be updated and what we've had so far not being as adequate as it's supposed to be. There's a lot that goes into it. It's pretty complicated once you actually go down that rabbit hole, so we're going to do our best to simplify that. Basically, there's been a tremendous awakening / understanding throughout most of the reptile community that the lighting that we've been using and promoting for this amount of, the entirety of the hobby, essentially, is not as adequate or accurate as it should be, depending on the species that we're keeping. And there's a lot more research coming out. They've been doing blood tests in snakes, and that's kind of revolutionizing a lot of the way that people are thinking about this. Supposedly, there's been some research done pointing to the fact that some snakes and maybe some reptiles in general, they can basically see UV. They can not only see it like as a light, but they can see what is saturated with UV to a point where some are theorizing that might even play a role in prey identification or mate selection. And so that's something that in captivity, maybe some of these species that are proving more difficult to breed over the years, maybe it has something to do with their UV saturation. Maybe they haven't been being kept with the right lighting, even if everything else is fine. And maybe that's what leads to certain pairs not really working out and others do. But it's definitely very interesting. And it's based on, like I said, a lot of the new research that's coming out. And I personally feel like at least the way it's going in the next 10 years, 5 to 10 years, the standards are going to be completely different than what we see today. And so I'm kind of wondering if maybe like I said, 5 to 10 years, we're going to start seeing more and more people just keeping all of their reptiles with UV simply because it's just what they need. And now this is pretty new. A lot of this stuff that's coming out is very relatively new. There's not a whole lot of information on the internet about it, aside from maybe 1 or 2 Facebook groups and YouTube videos. But honestly, the YouTube videos, they mostly just advertisements for new special light bulbs anyway, so you can't really tell how accurate half of them are. And most of the information on that Facebook group pretty much just brings you to this website, thomascass.co.uk. I guess he's one of the more forefront leaders in these developments, and it has a great resource for a lot of the in-depth information that you could be looking for trying to catch up and update on the lighting portion of your reptile keeping. So definitely check this website out. Check out the Facebook group. It's really easy. It's just Reptile Lighting. That's the Facebook group. Really great. They can help you figure out what lighting you could use for depending on the species / size of enclosure, what you're going for. It's really just a wealth of information. And now moving on to reptile news. Something kind of horrifying. Conservationists in Florida have recently been discussing an issue regarding the pentazomes, or lungworms, which apparently are an invasive species that hitched a ride from the invasive Burmese pythons, are now spreading throughout the northeastern or southeastern United States. Apparently, it's really bad for colubrid species, understandably. I guess the Burms have some sort of natural defense in their body that prevents the worms from growing too big and prevents them from reproducing. And a lot of the American species just don't have that. If you want to look into that more, I would definitely recommend not doing an image search because that will give you nightmares for the rest of your life. So pentazomes, lungworms, definitely keep that in the back of your mind if you like using branches or leaf litter or anything from outside for your captive snakes. I would definitely avoid that unless you want to bake it and bleach it. Do whatever you got to do. But yeah, definitely some good nightmare fuel right there. And speaking of nightmare fuel, nightmare fuel, everybody should do what they can to help spread awareness and oppose the H5137 Act happening in Massachusetts right now. I know this is not reptile related, and I myself don't really know a lot of the specifics. All I know is that this is aiming to heavily restrict a lot of exotic bird keepers in the state. Right now, I believe it's only affecting Massachusetts. So if you or someone you know is a exotic bird keeper in Massachusetts, definitely look into this and do what you can to reach out to your local representatives and let them know to oppose this. Because if you think they're going to stop for birds, or if you think they're going to stop at birds, you don't think they're going to come for your snakes, your lizards? If you think they're going to stop in Massachusetts, if you don't think they're going to come down the entire eastern seaboard, try to get everything everywhere, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. We all have to come together for this. Even if you don't keep exotic birds, if you live in Massachusetts, if you're interested in the exotics hobby at all, definitely reach out and tell them to oppose this bill. We do not want that. We do not want anything like this. This is just going to completely ruin a lot of people's lives and livelihoods. Not only people, but birds too. These birds are very intelligent and emotional creatures who bond with their people, and they can live for decades. So if you have a parrot that's been living with someone for 10 to 15 years and all of a sudden they have to bring it somewhere else and get rid of it, well, now that animal is going to be stressed. That animal is going to be traumatized. And we don't want that. So please, if you live in Massachusetts, if you know anyone that lives in Massachusetts, let them know about this. Ask them to take action. Please. Like I said, even if you're not a bird keeper, if you think they're going to stop at birds, and even if you don't live in Massachusetts, if you think they're going to stop in Massachusetts, you're wrong. You're just wrong. And that's part of the reason why I'm making a show like this and an episode like this, because we need to do better as a community, as a whole group of communities, to make sure that we are policing ourselves and putting forward the newest, most updated information and trying our best to provide the most for our animals in every aspect possible, because that is the only way we can justify keeping them when these people come knocking on the door. When these animal rights activists, when these people come knocking and they start saying, no, you're mistreating them, and here's some proof, they show the worst of the worst. And there's always going to be those people. You can never really eliminate them entirely, but that's why we need to be better as a community. Because the more of us that are doing everything we can to provide the best for our animals, the more of our own proof we can show and say, no, like, there's bad apples in every bunch, but the vast majority of us are doing the best we can and doing a hell of a good job. And so that's why lighting, you gotta make sure it's on par with how you should be keeping your animal. You absolutely have to. I've been updating my snake's lighting since I recently upgraded her enclosure, so she's now in a 6-foot enclosure. I have not gotten the new, I want to get a T5 UVB bulb. However, right now I just have not been able to get it yet, so I'm making do with her basking lamp and some plant lights. It's not the best, but at least she's able to get that photo period. She's able to get some UV, even if it's not the most. But that's definitely on my list for the next thing to get for her enclosure. I'm going to get me a nice 5-foot long T5 bulb, go across the majority of it, and that should provide the majority of her UV. I also want to make sure I get a UV meter so that I can make sure that my lights are constantly putting out what I need them. And I'm even looking into getting a UV camera, like one of the little ones that plugs into your phone. I think I think it's really mostly for like the cosmetic industry, like people using it to see what like the sun's damage on your skin or whatever. But I'm gonna see what it does when you point it at a snake or an enclosure that has UV lights. I'm gonna see if that shows any sort of effect, and we'll go from there. We'll see how that goes. Aside from that, I maybe want to put the lights on a timer. Right now, I kind of have a 3-stage system going on. So I've got 3 lights. One of them, it's really just a ridiculous little string lights that you get from Five Below. Those barely do anything. Those are what I consider the sunrise and sunset lights, because I'm usually awake at like 5 in the morning anyway. So I'll just turn on those lights, a little battery powered, just click them on. Barely any light in there, just enough for, like a crack of dawn. Then about 45 minutes to an hour later, I'll turn on the plant lights, and that's just for the bright light, so she gets like, good morning, it's the sun, haha. And then the plants get the light, and then about 30 minutes after those come on, I turn on her basking lamp, so she starts to get that deep heat from the, the UVA. But I'd like to get it on a timing system, personally, because it's just kind of a pain in the ass doing that manually 3 times or twice a day, because I have to do it in the morning and at night. At night I'll turn off once the sun starts to go down. I'll turn off her basking lamp, and then once it gets kind of dusky, I'll turn off her plant lights. So it's all that's left is those string lights, and then after the sun's totally down, I flick those off. That's just kind of, I don't know. I feel like having a nice photo period like that's good for them, especially I do intend to breed her in a couple of years. I've put a deposit on a male, so we'll see how that goes in a few years, but I want to start cycling them now because I haven't really been consistent with that. And supposedly, at least with the blackheads, the light cycle's possibly more important than the cooling cycle, or at least as important. I'm not really sure, but that'll be fun figuring out. But that's 2 years from now's problem. And I'm definitely curious about how supposedly they perceive UV saturated animals differently. I'm very curious if that has to do with any type of mate selection, because supposedly some female blackheads can be pretty particular about the mate you pair with them. And so I'm wondering if maybe UV has something to do with that. Who knows? It'll be a fun thing to experiment with moving on with my projects. I'm also possibly wondering if it has something to do with maybe helping the babies get started. Because as anyone that knows about breeding blackheads can tell you, at least in America, I'm not sure how it is in Australia, but in America, you pretty much have to assist feed the babies right out the gate most of the time. I guess for the most part, they don't really come out eating readily. And that's something I'm wondering too, is maybe if UV has something to do with that. Maybe they need that to help kind of jazz up their metabolism. Who knows? But anyways, that's been it for this episode. We're going to cut it now. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Hobby Herps, episode 4, Reptile Lighting Standards. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do next time. I have a few different ideas, a couple different things in the works. I just haven't pulled the trigger on which one's going to be the one I finish first, so bear with me. This whole channel is basically devoted to being inconsistent as hell. So it'll be about what it's about. But let me know in the comments what you thought. If you have any different suggestions or questions about lighting standards or any other resources you'd like to plug, definitely let me know, because I'm all about trying to read up on as many new things as possible and learn as much as possible. So other than that, y'all take care.